In this video, we will go over how to configure a FortiGate firewall to manage a FortiSwitch or multiple FortiSwitches. Now, to start, there's multiple different ways that you could decide to manage your FortiSwitches, right? You can do it the traditional method that we've all been used to in the past, where you log into each switch, and that would be a FortiSwitch standalone device. You could also do it where the switches can get managed by Fortinet's cloud option. It's called FortiLand Cloud, or in this case, we're going to focus on how we can do it from the FortiGate, right? So pretty much by just logging into the FortiGate, you reduce complexity by being able to access your switches right there instead of going into a different console, right? You gain more visibility as to what's happening on your switch's network, and then you can also leverage certain automation, right? So I'll put some suggested videos. I'll keep updating them. All right, so with the configuration, let's go to Wi-Fi and Switch Controller FortiLink interface. So we can see here by default, there's an interface named FortiLink. And then under that interface, there's supposed to be certain interface members. So the interface members are going to be physical ports on the FortiGate firewall. And then those physical ports are going to be dedicated for FortiSwitches connecting to this FortiGate for management, right? So we can see here that there are currently no interfaces that can be added as a member currently based on this FortiGate's config. So to address that, let's go to Network Interfaces. And then I'm just going to try and find some interfaces that I can break apart from maybe some existing configurations that I have. So let's pull apart internal 6 and internal 7 from an existing hardware switch that's on the firewall. There we see internal 6, internal 7. Both of these interfaces, as you can see, they have no references associated with them, so they should be good for us to go back to Wi-Fi and switch controller and to use them as interface members for FortiLink. So in this case, I'm going to start with just using internal 7. Maybe we can use internal 6 in a bit here. Okay, let's save that config. All right, so we can also see here that there is, a default IP address for this virtual interface, the FortiLink interface, and then there's also a DHCP range that's going to be associated to FortiSwitches that connect up to this firewall. All right, now I'm going to connect a FortiSwitch up to the internal 7 port on the FortiGate. All right, there we go. I have it connected up, but we still don't see any FortiSwitch connected. It's just rebooting right now, or it's just booting up. So let's just give it another minute or so. There we go. Just like that, we see the FortiSwitch is connected. Now, as the next step, let's go to Managed FortiSwitches, right-click it, and then authorize that FortiSwitch that we've just connected. It says it'll take up from 6 to 8 minutes. All right, after a few minutes, we can see that the FortiSwitch is now online. And one interesting item that we can do here is if we go to the far right and we change from list to topology view, we can actually see what ports are connected from the FortiGate to the FortiSwitch, right? So we can see that, okay, internal 7 on the FortiGate firewall is connected to port 24 on the FortiSwitch. And you can hover right in between to the pretty much this logical link that got created. And then that's where you can see, both sides. And also if we hover over the FortiSwitch and then we go to switch actions, we have, a lot of options here if we want to deauthorize, delete the switch, if we want to factory reset it, if you ever had to. And then also some diagnostics and tools, right, to see, where we're at for CPU, memory, resource usage on the switch. You can do a bit of a cable test, view some logs, CLI access. So lots of good information there. Now let's go into, because we do have the switch authorized. That's really all that it takes, and now we should be able to start configuring FortiSwitch ports. Okay, and pretty quickly here we can see, all of the ports. So it's a 24-port switch with, I believe it's I've got 4 SFP ports connected from port 25 to 28, but it is a 24-port switch. We can see the ports that are connected. We can see, what features are enabled. We can see the native VLAN. So you can think of this native VLAN as the access VLAN, essentially, right? So when somebody connects up to, for example, port 1 on this physical FortiSwitch, they're going to be associated with VLAN 1, right? And, it's kind of cool here. You can just kind of change that on the fly to any other VLANs that are configured on the network. We have PoE information, device information about what device might be connected to that port. In this case, I have an access point connected to it, but we can also see information about various other devices. From a troubleshooting perspective, let's say if you needed to, somebody had a certain issue and you're running a sniffer, for example, on the firewall, can't see the traffic. Well, you could say, hey, what's your MAC address? Find an end user's MAC address, put that in here, and really quickly you can identify, okay, which physical port on the switch is that device connected to, and then which VLAN is that device associated with, right? So maybe we can go over a bit of a start to finish example. So right now we're in the switch configuration, but let's go back to the regular FortiGate firewall configuration. If we were to create a new interface, let's just create a new interface under and then we're going to associate it with the FortiLink interface. Let's just call this production. Maybe this is our production interface. We'll go VLAN ID will be 100, and then let's create let's just create the IP address. This is going to be the FortiGate's IP address for VLAN 100, and we'll have a DHCP server set up. Okay, we're good to go. So we've associated that with the FortiLink interface. So essentially we have a sub interface on the FortiGate firewall. It's called this production VLAN, right? That's really all that it takes now, and now we can start immediately referencing it on that FortiSwitch. So if we go back to that section, Wi-Fi and switch controller, FortiSwitch ports. All right, and looking at port 6 here, I have some devices connected to it. This is all the devices that are actually in this ESXi environment. I have a Windows machine there. So let's change the native VLAN from VLAN 1. Let's change it to that production VLAN, which kind of automatically shows up here. We'll hit apply. And just like that, the device that's connected to port 6 is actually going to be, when traffic flows through that device, the switch is going to tag that traffic with VLAN ID 100. That traffic then is, it's going to be sent up the trunk link with this tagged, with the tagged packet that goes up to this FortiGate. And then the next step is that it actually hits this interface associated with the FortiLink, which is going to be production, right? So, let's go over that quick example is, and I'm just going to enable ping here, and then let's go over to that virtual machine. All right, now onto that VM, we can see that it received a DHCP address on the 192.168.111 network. We can do a ping to 111.1, which is the default gateway, which is the FortiGate. And then, if we try and access the internet, it's not going to work. We don't have a firewall policy set. All right, so on the FortiGate, I've already gone ahead and pre-configured a policy. So, the production VLAN, so VLAN ID 100. So any tagged traffic that hits the FortiGate on VLAN ID 100, we're going to send it out the WAN interface. So we've created that policy. Let's go back to the device, and there we go. Now we have internet access. All right, so at this point, you can probably, maybe you can stop the video now if this is everything that you were looking for, but we'll go over a couple more things. You can check the chapters below to pick and choose what you want to see, but let's cover a few more items. So one item that might come up is redundancy with the links between the FortiGate and the FortiSwitch. So up until now, we've just been using this internal 7 interface on the FortiGate, and we don't actually have anything that's redundant from a multiple link perspective between the FortiGate and the switch. So if we select that other interface that we kind of made available to us in the very beginning of the video, which is internal 6 on the FortiGate, if I add that, then what I'll do is going back to our topology here, I've got port 24 on the switch connected to internal 7 on the FortiGate. Let's connect port 23 to internal 6 on the FortiGate. Okay, so internal 6 on the FortiGate is connected to port 23 on the FortiSwitch. So, even though those physical connections have been made on my end, as I'm refreshing this FortiLink interface page, we can see that internal 6 is not lighting up as green here, right? And the reason for that is because we have what's called this FortiLink split interface enabled. This is actually by design. You can look it up more to see its underlying purpose, but essentially it's expected at the moment that even though there's a physical connection, it's not actually showing the link as up between internal 6 and port 23 on the FortiSwitch. And to show how this FortiLink split interface works, what I'll do is I'm going to unplug internal 7 from the FortiGate. And we can see immediately that internal 6 lights up and that's the active link, right? So this is expected behavior, but what we'll do is, let's do a test here and we'll reconnect internal 7. I'll do that now. Okay, it's been reconnected. Same as before, when I refresh it, only internal 6 or the existing active link is going to, show as the link is up. But so both ports are now connected. Let's actually disable FortiLink split interface. And pretty quickly here, we can see that both of these links are now active, right? And then if I go into the CLI here, I can type in diagnetlink aggregate name FortiLink, because FortiLink is the name of the logical interface. We can see here that it actually established an LACP connection between the two, right? So now we've added that redundancy that we would be looking for initially. And back to our managed FortiSwitch topology, we can see that now FortiLink, which is internal 7 and internal 6, is connected to the FortiSwitch port 23 and port 24, and this is the LACP link between the two, and the topology is updated. You might have to give the topology a few minutes before it actually updates. It might show an older value just temporarily. There is a bit of GUI stuff that has to go on in the background to show you that updated topology. So just in general, from a topology standpoint, it's worth it to check the FortiSwitch managed topologies documentation that Fortinet has. So, we can have some basic topologies like a single FortiGate managing a single FortiSwitch unit, kind of like we have right now. Or maybe we can get into some more complex environments where, and this also depends on switch model as well, as you can have some more complex topologies. In this case, maybe let's pick one of these options here, which could be, HA mode, FortiGate. Okay, so we can see that this topology looks kind of more complex, but if I take just a subset of this topology, then maybe I'll just say, okay, we have the FortiGate already. We have, say that for example, that switch that we've been using up until now could be that distribution switch, but then maybe I just want to, hang another switch off of that distribution switch to pretty much to use this topology, but then make it more applicable to the environment with the gear that I've got available, right? So let's try something like that. Let's just hang a smaller switch off of that distribution switch. So back to the FortiGate, I've got port 23 and port 24 already allocated. We can just go to our FortiSwitch ports section here. We've got lots available, so I don't know, maybe we'll just use port 22. So I'm going to take an 8-port switch. It's called a 108D FortiSwitch. Let's take an 8-port switch, and I'm just going to connect it up to port 22 now. All right, so once it is showing up here, we follow the same procedure as we did with the initial 24-port switch. We'll just right-click it, click Authorize, and then we'll wait a few minutes for it to go online. All right, now we can see that the switch is online. We can change to the topology view here, and just like that, the new topology has kind of automatically built itself, right? And yeah, we can see that some of this stuff might still take some time here, but overall it looks pretty good. We can see that connection is up and running. So when we go to FortiSwitch ports now, we're going to see an additional switch in the view, right? So if we kind of collapse everything, here's the switch we were looking at initially. Here is the new switch, right? And then, there's an automatic trunk that gets created between, for example, this is port 10 on the 108D, the 8-port smaller switch, is connected up to port 22 on the larger switch, and pretty much, all VLANs that we configure on the, any type of native VLAN configuration that we do on this switch, it's going to just be trunked up to the upstream switch, which is the 224E, and then trunked again up to the FortiGate. All right, so let's end off with just a few troubleshooting tips and tools here, right? So, to start, if we just want to see, basic status of the, 40 switches that are connected, execute switch controller, get connection status, right? So we can, get an idea as to serial number, version, whether they're authorized and up, their IP address, when they joined, if there's any type of configuration sync errors, or for example, right, then you'd see one of these flags showing up here. What's another command? Execute switch controller, get sync status all. Just some information about configuration sync status, or some more diagnostics. You could go diagnose or diagnose, switch controller, switch info. I'm just going to put in a question mark here, and there's just a lot of options that you can use to really get a lot of information from the switch via the FortiGate in this case, right? The FortiGate is the one that's managing these switches, so you can get a lot of information just from the firewall. So if we go, for example, let's get an idea on some of the port stats. Okay, so we can see every switch port, and then its individual interface configuration. I suppose you can probably dive deeper into that command and go to a specific port, for example. There we go. Going back to that switch info command, and I just select up to go to a previous command I've already entered. And then if I go MAC table, we can see, get an idea as to the MAC address table. Another command that we could do is if we want to have maybe a CLI, sort of a CLI version of the configuration, we could type in, something like what I have above there. So execute switch controller, and then, get physical connection, or get physical-conn. And then we could have different formations of how the topology looks, right? So this is kind of showing us a CLI representation of the topology. The first one was dot. The second one can be standard, to just give me a different overview of how the configuration is from pretty much switch port to switch port. We can also run some debugs too. So if we type in, diagnose, debug, application, fortilinkd -1, we can have some troubleshooting information, maybe about, connectivity between the FortiGate and the FortiSwitch, if there's any type of issues being seen there. I'm going to type in diag debug disable here to stop that output, diag debug reset to reset the filter. Another one we could try is diag debug application flcfgd -1. This one's kind of interesting. Okay, so let's start that. Let's enable it. Okay, so, there's really nothing that's running right now. It's saying no job to schedule. But if I went to the FortiSwitch now and I made a configuration change, let's say I configure, I just configure a port for a different VLAN, and then I'll quickly go back to that debug. There we go, right? So we could have that information. We can actually see what specifically is going on. We can help tack or whatever it might be, right? It can give us an idea as to what's happening with the configuration, on the back end there. Another item to be aware of is that the FortiSwitches really rely on NTP. Like they do need to have the correct timestamp. So, make sure that you have an NTP server that has, the same time as the FortiGates, right? And just check those times, right? So you can use the FortiGate as an NTP server for devices connected on the FortiLink, which is going to be the FortiSwitches. Now, let's consider a scenario too where we would want to maybe do some troubleshooting and running a sniffer on specific traffic that's coming from a switch port on the FortiSwitch. Well, to start with that, I think we need to step back a little bit and just understand the topology a little bit, so that we know which interface that we need to be actually looking for traffic on. So using this machine that we have on the right hand here, right, 192.168.111.8, let's just think about the topology, the topology before traffic actually hits the firewall. So it's just a really rough topology I have here on the left side. We can think about it this way. Traffic originating from 192.168.111.8, since that's connected to the FortiSwitch, that FortiSwitch its interface is VLAN 100, right? So if we go to that Wi-Fi and switch controller, FortiSwitch ports, that device is connected to port 6 in my case, which is the production VLAN 100, right? So then that traffic, as expected, it's going to be sent over a trunk interface up to the FortiGate 61E, which we see right here. That's the next step. Okay, well, the traffic is going to be received on either the internal 6 or the internal 7 interface based on this current configuration, right? And that's because if we look at the managed FortiSwitch here, we have, port 23 on the switch is connected to internal 7 and internal 6 on the FortiGate. So the physical interfaces will receive a tagged a tagged frame. Now, let's follow that internal 6 and internal 7 interface. So if we go to network interfaces, we just confirm here that yes, the member of FortiLink is internal 7 and internal 6. Right, so we can see here is when the tagged frame for VLAN 100 hits internal 7 or internal 6 on the physical port, that's automatically going to be directed to the FortiLink interface. So now the FortiLink interface has that traffic. So let's take a stop here and let's actually relate that to a sniffer. Let's do a sniffer on the FortiLink interface for a second. So let's type in the following command, and for more information about sniffer, I have a suggested link here with more details about the specific commands, but let's type in diag-sniffer packet, and then the interface that we are filtering on is going to be FortiLink. We'll have an empty filter, so we're not looking for a specific host or anything like that. And then additionally, let's type in 40L as in Lima. Okay, there we go. So, as you can see, right now we're sniffing for traffic here, right? So, each packet per line on this sniffer is showing me what type of traffic is hitting that FortiLink interface directly. So we can see a lot of traffic showing 802.1q VLAN 100, and that's because the FortiLink interface isn't going to see the actual specific traffic because it's going to be tagged. So all it's showing us is, okay, this interface is receiving a tagged packet on VLAN 100, right? So everything that's pretty much, this is a small environment, so everything that's happening on this machine, that's really what we're seeing. Every single packet shows this. But if we want the actual details of, say, if someone's doing an actual ping, something like that, if we want to see that detail on the FortiGate sniffer, we have to take the next step, and we actually have to not focus on just this FortiLink interface here, not just this FortiLink interface, but the interface below it, right? The interface below it is this production interface, right? Right, so now if I change the filter on the sniffer to be specific to production, then now the traffic that receives, that the FortiGate receives that's tagged with VLAN ID 100, now that's actually going to show up in the sniffer, right? So I'll type in production, and then now let's actually put in our filter, for example. All right, and then we'll go back here. Let's do our ping. Back to the FortiGate, there we go. Now the sniffer actually picks it up. Right, so hopefully that helps you kind of get a better idea as to how to troubleshoot, but then also it can kind of give you the approach to as to how you need to be thinking about the topology, because there are a lot of components, but at the end of the day, it does get simpler once we kind of lay things out this way to really understand, okay, how is the traffic flowing from a device connected to the FortiSwitch through that FortiLink trunk to the FortiGate, and then to actually hit the individual sub interface or VLAN interface on the FortiGate, which in this case was named production on VLAN 100. All right, thanks everyone for joining in here, and we'll see you in the next video.